welcome to Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul. My co-host Justin Baker and I are ready to talk all the trades. Trades upcoming, trades that we've dreamed up in our heads, and most of all, trades that would involve the Vancouver Canucks, because they are about to spread the stuff all over the ceiling, as it were. Justin, hi. Welcome to the show.
Stuff all over the ceiling.
Stuff all over the ceiling. It's going to happen, right? Like, I was waiting for the notification that Bruce Boudreau was canned.
I mean, it's happening, right? It's apparently they've got Mr. Tocchet lined up, ready to go, and apparently Sergei Gonchar's coming over from wherever he's been hanging out. I honestly can't remember off the top of my head, but apparently he's going to be a quote unquote assistant, according to the insiders, whomever they may be. So we'll see how that plays out.
Who are your insiders?
Darren Dreger, those guys.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, with Vancouver has been such a Jekyll and Hyde kind of team. Like, all right, they're so far out of it, time to fire the coach, and then they go rattle off 4 in a row, and then they pull themselves back into position, and then they, as soon as they're close, they just fall off the map again, and they're 3-7 in their last 10. I mean, how have we not put a pin in the Boudreau deal? Like, you wanted to fire him in the offseason. Or I shouldn't say they wanted to fire him. They didn't want to keep him. Like, that was the news, was that they, it was all the contract talks and they couldn't figure it out. And it was like Vancouver didn't want to keep him, but they kind of had to because they had such good success at the end of the year. And my hunch is that Jim Rutherford went, I understand we had success. I don't think that it's sustainable success. And he was right. Although he didn't have the balls to pull the trigger. And that's what it comes down to, right? Like, it's, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think that, like a lot of other teams, they had this pipe dream of Barry Trotz or some of the other coaches, right, that they would be able to get their hands on him in the offseason, and it just didn't work out. So you just basically say at this point, well, crap, you know what? He's probably the best we're going to do at this point. We'll see how the season goes and go from there. And you're probably right, though. It was just a big pipe dream.
Yeah, but if you liked Rick Tocchet so much, why, could have done this in the offseason, and maybe you get your whole season back. Maybe you're in a completely different position. But I get it. It's hard to fire a coach that just went on pace for about 97, 98 points when he was your coach.
So he was a fan favorite.
Right.
Bruce, there it is.
I get it. But it's clear that there was an issue. I mean, from what I understand, the way that he was running camp, and there was all sorts of different knocks against him that maybe some teams wouldn't have minded, but particularly Jim Rutherford, it sounded like he has an issue, or Patrick Alvin, their general manager, and it's this is like the longest it's ever taken a coach to get fired when we all know he's getting fired. Right. Even on teams where you're like, well, I get it, they're bad and they could fire their coach. Maybe they will, maybe they should, but they don't have to. This is like, why in God's name have you not fired him yet? Like, what kind of, it just seems mean at this point. And I mean, everyone, you got to feel for Bruce Boudreau. I mean, he came here to be the coach. He did really well last year, and then he basically gets no support from upper management and goes into this year, and of course you crap the bed because your upper management doesn't support you. I mean, how often do you see a coach where upper management goes, we'd really like to get rid of this guy, we're waiting for him to fail, and he succeeds? It doesn't happen. It very rarely is that going to happen. But yes, the Vancouver Canucks, I mean, I think all of this certainly is bringing about the conversation about the trades that are upcoming in Vancouver. We now know that Tanner Pearson is likely out for the rest of the year, about to have his 3rd or 4th hand surgery. And according to Quinn Hughes, they botched it. Like, is what we understand. Quinn Hughes came out and said they botched it, or they're not doing him well, and that sucks. It's just another blight on your team. But when it comes to the Canucks, I think the thing that we're most interested in, and the thing that we're waiting for, and the thing that Jim Rutherford has brought in the past, is some fun moves. like some aggressive trades that change the dynamic of the team. And they have yet to do that since he has been the general manager. There really has been no really big trades, significant pieces being brought in or out. And now you wonder, who's first?
That's the question, right? I mean, you have to assume at this point it's probably Bo Horvat. I mean, gosh, I don't know if you've got a chance to listen to his recent presser, but basically he said everybody but Elias Pettersson is touchable, right? I think he did say that Quinn Hughes, it would take a monster package to pull him away too, but basically Elias Pettersson was the only untouchable, which is kind of a shocker to me. I would assume Quinn Hughes would be untouchable too, but maybe New Jersey wants to make a play and have all the
the
Hughes brothers
together. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, look, to me, Bo Horvat's the obvious answer. I think again, in Rutherford's little presser, he came out and said that they made their best their best offer, and from what I understand, it probably starts with a 7. So
which is laughable.
It is a little bit, but even if
even if it starts with an 8, I think that there is at least a couple teams that would be willing to pay him 9 or more.
No, absolutely. I think an 8 is a fair number given his history. Yes, he is having a career year, and yes, he's a phenomenal two-way player, great face-off person. But again, given his history, he's never really had this kind of production that he's having this season. So, again, a lot of players, they cash in or they like to have their career years when they're in for a contract. And so, but the bottom line is they made an offer and they made it clear that they weren't going any higher than what they offered, JT Miller on his extension. And, maybe that might be insulting to Bo Horvat, because he's the captain. He's a guy, if you look at it between the way JT Miller just kind of JT Miller is a great hockey player, don't get me wrong, but he has these moments where I watch him this season and he just kind of gives up on plays. He just is, He turns the shit over like constantly. And so you think if you're Bo Horvat, you're looking at him like, okay, I am obviously a better hockey player than JT Miller, or at least on the same page. So you have to think I should be getting at least $8 million, especially because I wear the C as well. So.
Well, yeah, and he's been there. He was drafted by the Canucks. Remember, he was the first round pick traded by the Devils to the Canucks for Corey Schneider, and he's been with the Canucks ever since. So there is something to be said about that. When you're the homegrown guy and you've been there forever, and to lose him, I think would be very telling as to how deep this organization has gone into the toilet bowl. Like, he wants to stay. You're not willing to pay him. Like, let's be honest. Bo Horvat or Matthew Barzal? Which one would you rather have?
Oh, I'll take Bo Horvat all day.
Right, and Barzal's going to get 9-1.
Exactly, yeah.
And who is in a very similar situation, right? Like, he's drafted by the Islanders. He's a good player. Like, and he's about to get paid because he loves the island. He wants to stay in New York, and Horvat wants to stay in Vancouver. They're not willing to pay him that Horvat or the Barzal money is my guess, and the money that I think that it's likely that also Dylan Larkin goes after as well, is that right around $9 million a year, which is something we can get to, of course, later in the show. But yes, Horvat. So Horvat goes. Where do you think he's going? Where are your landing places for Horvat?
Oh boy, obviously the first place that I look at is the Colorado Avalanche.
But do you want to get traded to a team that's going to miss the playoffs?
Well, maybe not, but again, he doesn't have any say in that, right? And if you're the Vancouver Canucks, maybe you take a gamble and you make that play anyways and hope to get I'm assuming they're going to get a first round pick back for him no matter what. So, you get a first round pick from Colorado, it potentially could be a lottery pick, or at least get you, in the low 10s maybe or something if you luck out on the lottery and they miss the playoffs. So there's that potential, and I'm sure Colorado would make it top 10, protected. But again, I think Colorado to me is the easy team to just say, hey, you know what, I think this is where this guy's going to go. But I think beyond that, another team that I honestly would love to see him go to, that I think he would fit in well for his style of play. Now, creating cap room would be, I think a little bit harder for this team than maybe Colorado, but the Carolina Hurricanes, I think, could really use a Bo Horvat because, last year when Carolina was, falling out of the playoffs, I said the one thing they've been missing for a while is like that superstar player, right? Or that elite scorer. And so I think with Matt Pacioretty back, and I think Svechnikov taking another step, I think they can kind of, button up that scoring that they need. But I think they also need to find themselves an elite number 2 center now that Trocheck's gone. And, honestly, Kotkaniemi's not really doing it. I know Jim Rutherford came out and said that they want to get younger. And maybe this is the move, right? Maybe you do a sign and trade where you get rid of Kotkaniemi and you toss in maybe some other pieces, some picks, and you work out a way to bring in Bo Horvat on a sign and trade.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm Vancouver. I'm looking at Kotkaniemi and want that deal.
I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think there's opportunities to get younger if that's, these would be the type of pieces you would have to look at, reclamation projects, much like Ethan Bear, what they did with him, right? I think they went to Edmonton and they found a player that maybe they thought they could, re-energize or rejuvenate, and he's come in and played pretty well for them. All things considered, is even though this team is sitting 30th in goals against in the league, but I think Ethan Bear has worked out pretty well, and so I think they'll try to look for guys like that, not necessarily Kotkaniemi maybe because of his term and contract, but other guys of that age and caliber.
There's one team that I think should go out and grab Bo Horvat, and it would do the opposite of what Vancouver's doing. By trading Bo Horvat, you're kind of in my mind, I get they're maybe not doing like a full tear down rebuild, but you're losing a big piece. It's going to change your team. He's the captain, so it's going to change the entire dynamic of your team. And I think the team that could use a Bo Horvat walking into the playoffs, or at least this trade deadline time. Now, the sooner they could get him, the better, because this team is not guaranteed anything at this point. They're not in the playoffs yet, but that's the Buffalo Sabres.
Ooh.
I wonder, the Sabres, now the Sabres have, they've got, some games in hand. I know they're 6 points out of the playoffs right now, but add in a Bo Horvat and convince him to stay in Buffalo. Suddenly you've got Tage Thompson, Horvat, Middlestat up the middle, and you don't have to play Middlestat up the middle anymore, which in my mind is actually, that's probably ideal. Then you can play Dylan Cousins at the third line. You can play him as a third line center. You've got Tyson Jost, who you're playing as a fourth line center. I think he would really add to that team. And the defensive center of a Stanley Cup winning team is so crucial, and I don't think the Sabres have it. I'm not saying the Sabres are going to make the playoffs this year, but it would be interesting to make that deal, and you might need to have you might have to have a deal in place to acquire them to make it worth it for you. But that would be a destination. They could afford the full cap hit. That would be a destination that would make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I like that from the perspective that Vancouver could get back younger pieces, which is what I know they want. So they could go after a guy like Jack Quinn. You could potentially try to throw in, a Casey Middlestat, younger guys like that I think that Vancouver could build around. Their low cap hits right now.
Got a couple of years left on a deal, with Casey Middlestat, or another year left before he's an RFA, Casey Middlestat.
Yeah, I think that would probably fare pretty well and be quite doable because, look, they've also got 3 second-round picks this year, so I think that's capital that they could afford to burn if they want to toss in, later, a 2025 first-round pick and maybe a second-round pick or something of that nature with a good prospect. I think, like Jack Quinn, that could get it done.
They also have Peyton Krebs down there in the minors.
Yep. That could get it done.
There are some nice pieces, something that could work for both teams. Now, I don't know that Buffalo might say, we're just not in the position to make that move. We would rather sit and let a guy like Jack Quinn, let a guy like Peyton Krebs develop, and that's totally fair. But as far as what they need a guy like Bo Horvat. I think to really find themselves in a position to not just make the playoffs but contend in that division, especially. Like, you're going toe to toe with some pretty damn good centers. And not that, I mean, Tage Thompson obviously isn't a slouch, but I don't know that he has the ability to shut guys down. And playoff time is a very, very different, as we see every year, that you can be a high-flying player in the regular season, and come playoff time, if you can't grind, you aren't going to win. Now,
I will tell you this. I mean, I will say for Tage Thompson, Dylan Cousins, these younger guys, I mean, that would be just ideal. Even if they get swept in the first round, I think it would be invaluable experience for these younger players.
Oh, I mean, as long as they're not playing the Leafs, I'd be rooting for them. They probably would play the Boston Bruins, and you're never going to hate a Boston Buffalo first round. Would not complain about that at all.
Nope.
Okay. Well, I mean, we could probably just talk Vancouver Canucks the entire show, but I do want to pivot a little bit to the Seattle Kraken, who, believe it or not, if you haven't heard, they broke a North American sports record with the most consecutive road wins, with an undefeated road trip of 8 games. I think it was 7 or 8 games.
7 games.
7 games. Pretty incredible. Amazing that's never happened before. Like, you'd think of all the really great teams that have been out there that someone would have won 7 games in a 7-game road trip, but nope, never been done before. Pretty cool for the Seattle Kraken. And the Kraken, who we talked just a couple shows ago, I'm willing to eat my words here. I actually looked at their January schedule and I was like, they're screwed. Like, this has been all nice and good, but it doesn't look like they're going to be able to keep this pace up, and likely they will fall out of the playoffs. I did say that. I said they'd fall out of the playoffs, and my God, they did just the opposite. They actually took January by the balls and squeezed it, and then they ate the testicles for dessert. They have made this month their bitch, and Seattle is now in a position where, I mean, they're 9 points up on the Avalanche, who would be if they fell all the way into the wild card spot. I mean, that's a long way to fall. As far as their own division, they are, they're tied with LA with 3 games in hand, though. And then the next team's Vancouver with 39 points, 17 points behind. So, well, I guess you've got Edmonton and Calgary in there, 51. Seattle's just killing it, and they're doing it in a way that I don't think either one of us expected, and that is scoring more goals than pretty much everyone in the NHL. It's incredible.
Yeah, they've been impressive. I mean, look, if you look at their road trip they just had, not only did they hand Boston their first regulation loss at home this season, which is incredible to think that if I had to pick a team that would have done it, I would have maybe said Toronto, right? Or maybe Carolina. But no, it was Seattle. Would have been last. But they go ahead and score 8 on Chicago, 8 on Ottawa. They put up 5 against Toronto, 5 on Edmonton. I mean, they were lighting it up, like you said, and they managed to throw in a couple shutouts in there too. So
they've scored 8 goals 4 times this year.
Yeah, very impressed. I mean, look, if you look up and down this lineup, right, they're just deep. They have a lot of second line, borderline, first line players that are just up and down this lineup for their top 9 is just stacked, in my opinion. And, you don't have to go out there and play your top line 19, 20 minutes a game. You can rotate everybody in 16, 17 minutes and get equal play across the board of your top 9. And guys are energized and still competitive the whole way, the whole game through.
I mean, they're getting ready to Vegas.
Oh, yeah.
They're 2 games in hand, 2 points back, and in a couple games they might jump the Vegas Golden Knights and be this expansion team sitting here in first place. This season suddenly has a ton of intrigue for the Seattle Kraken, and they have to be one of those teams that you're like, everyone's rooting for them, right? Like, it's hard not to. Do you think that they make a move? Are they going to go out there and try to acquire, they, like a lot of teams, they need that center depth. But this team still has probably holes everywhere. I would say. Especially the goaltending position has still been weak. I don't know if they can do much about it, but do you think they go out and make a move, or do they just kind of like let this thing ride out?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? I personally would like to see them make a move. I would like to see them bring in somebody, not necessarily somebody of significance. Like, you're not going to go out and, make a move for Ryan O'Reilly or Tarasenko, right? You're not going to bring in one of those big name guys. But I mean, I would like to see them maybe make a play on, say, maybe Washington, drops out and you bring in Eric Gustafsson, or, who would be, maybe even make a play on a guy like Matthew Dumba out of Minnesota, because, rumors are he's been on the block and they would like to bring in somebody else, and, he's not in their long-term plan. So maybe they make a play on a guy like that, or Gustav Nyquist, who I think is somebody who can contribute in a top 9 position out of Columbus, who, might fit in pretty well with, because he's still got legs. He can still score. He dishes the puck pretty good, as long as, he has somebody who can finish. And so I think he would fit in well in Seattle.
Yeah. If I'm Seattle, I'm looking at my success and I'm going, I don't want to bring in anyone that's going to rock the boat. I don't want to bring in anybody that's going to mess with my top 9. I don't want to bring in anybody that's going to mess with my top 4. Like, things are just going well. And it's not necessarily something that you can explain. Like, they don't have a superstar up front. They're, defensively they have some good players, but no one is a number 1 defenseman. So, I mean, I see this and I say, you got to ride this out with the guys that you have and bring in those depth pieces, like a lot of teams will at the deadline. And they have 3 second-round picks, 2 fourth-round picks. You can spend one of those to bring in a decent asset that is going to kind of tip you over the, put you over the top, maybe in that series with the Los Angeles Kings, which sure looks like that might be the series. Or where do you think Seattle ultimately falls now? Do you think that they can jump Vegas?
I think by the end of the year, when things start to get a little tighter, a little bit more scrappy down the stretch, I don't think they'll hop Vegas, because I think with a healthy Mark Stone coming back eventually, and with Jack Eichel now being healthy for a stretch, and they'll get it going. I think Vegas will take this division, but I do think that 2 or 3 spot looks prime for Seattle in the Pacific right now, because I don't know about Edmonton and Calgary right now. I know Evander Kane's coming back tonight, so that'll be a boost for Edmonton, but who knows how long it takes him to come back. And with a hand, injury like he had, who knows what you're going to get.
Yeah. It's weird to hear you say a healthy Mark Stone. Okay. So let's sneak on over to the Eastern Conference here for a minute. You mentioned the Carolina Hurricanes in the Horvat deal, which certainly would embolden them at the top of that division. New Jersey is back to their winning ways. They've won 5 straight. They're 1 point back of Carolina, and the Rangers have pulled themselves into a divisional playoff spot. The Penguins and the Capitals, hanging off in the wild card along with the Islanders. So I want to ask you, where do you see this Metropolitan Division slotting out?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? I think, obviously what I'm looking at is what New Jersey's going to do before the deadline, because this is a team right now that's, playing some good hockey. They won 5 in a row, and but they've been a very streaky team all year long, right? They'll go on a hot streak. They'll win, 9 out of 10, and then all of a sudden they'll lose 6 straight. So for me, I think New Jersey probably down the stretch with a lot of younger guys, ultimately I think they'll maybe slip just a little bit. And I think this Ranger team is going to make a move here pretty soon. I can't see them staying pat where they are as far as the roster is concerned. So I think they'll bring somebody in before the deadline, whether that's Patrick Kane, somebody else, another big name, but I don't think they're going to sit idle. And so for me, the Rangers, I think, will make a push, especially with that goaltending. I really love Shesterkin, obviously, with the Vezina winner back there. So I think, for me, the Rangers ultimately hop up to number 2. You'll see Carolina still hold on to that number 1 spot. I think they're too well coached and not to finish there. And, ultimately, I think it's going to come down to New Jersey probably around 3, and then you're going to see, I think, a dogfight between, Washington, Pittsburgh, Florida, and maybe you could throw in Buffalo there for that wild card.
Okay, here's you mentioned Patrick Kane. We know that he has been struggling with an injury, and there was rumors that he might have to shut himself down. He came out and said, "No, I'm not going to shut myself down." But you have to wonder. I mean, he has not had a Patrick Kane-esque season, anyways. But you got to wonder now with this injury, what are you getting when you bring in Patrick Kane? And what are you realistically willing to give up for a guy that you're going to have to, you're going to have to put him in it's going to have to be a 3-way trade to dump salary. So you're going to be paying extra picks for that little bit of salary cap. Is it worth it? Like, as he plays more and more hockey down the stretch, for a bad team, mind you, which certainly can, I think, impact some players. You're already not playing for a playoff spot, so I wonder how hard it is to kind of keep yourself in that playoff mindset. And then you compound that with the injury that he has that clearly isn't going to get totally healed. He'll rest it. They'll probably keep him out here and there and be able to rest it, but it's not going to fully heal is what it sounds like. So are you willing to give up first round picks and prospects for a guy who may or may not actually make an impact on your team?
Well, so here's the big thing that, I don't think most people are taking into consideration as much, but that's the fact he has a no movement clause. So, regardless if, you want to make a play for him, I think Patty Kane ultimately is going to decide if he wants to go and where he wants to go. So if he says, hey, I want to go to the New York Rangers, the team that everybody's been kind of pointing to since the beginning of the season. If he says, I'm going to the Rangers and no one else, well, if Chicago wants to get anything for him, it's, I don't know if they're
we've seen that before where a player is basically like, I want to go to this team and this team only. What was it?
Claude Giroux was like that last year. He just wanted to go to Florida, and that was it. Only place.
And they still got a first round pick for it, and
right. And I think the Rangers will ultimately give up a first round pick, or any team for that matter, for Patty Kane. But what they give up on top of that is, not necessarily going to be that much more. I think you might have to give up, say a third or fourth round pick for another team to just eat a little bit of salary at the deadline. And I think, for a guy like Patrick Kane, who you could slot it on your third line and, again, not have to play a lot of tough minutes, and you could give him maybe 14 minutes a game where you only play him, a little 5-on-5, but then he's out there on the number one power play unit full time. So that way, any injury, you're kind of minimizing the damage, let's say.
Yeah, minimizing the risk, at least, of him having a block shot or something like that.
Exactly. And so I think having him out there for a third line, especially on a team that maybe has a lot of depth on their top six already, that to me is just going to be, I think an easy sell for a guy like, for a team like the Rangers to say, okay, cool. Yeah, we can easily get rid of the first round pick. Now, if it's a team that, ideally Patty Kane wants to go to, but they can only really, they really need him on their top line, maybe their top six, because they're just so short offensively up front. That might be a little bit more of an issue, for example, maybe like you could maybe throw the Nashville Predators in there, right? They've struggled to score some goals. Say for whatever reason, he decides, I want to go to Nashville City. I want to hang out there, whether we make the playoffs or not, so maybe Nashville, might be a little bit more hard pressed to give up, something for a guy like that they, necessarily need a little bit more than maybe the Rangers do, I guess.
Yeah. It sure sounds like he's going to eventually end up on the Rangers. I just don't know if I'd be willing, some of those trades you look back and you go, shouldn't have given up your first round pick for that. I just now Patrick Kane is a different animal. Of course, Patrick Kane is worth a first round pick if he's healthy. That would just be my concern is, hey, he's not healthy. And maybe that gets worked into the deal where you're, hey, it's a second round pick, becomes a first round pick if he plays X amount of games, or we go X amount of rounds, something like that. But
yeah, that's great.
Okay. I can't remember how we got there, but, top team in the Metro. Do you see Washington or Pittsburgh making a move here. I mean, to me, it's pretty clear that these teams are in the twilight of their effectiveness. And if they don't make a move, I don't know that both of them make the playoffs.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the Penguins, I think that you're just looking at a team that kind of has to ride out some of these contracts, like the Jason Zucker deal. You're hoping that goes away, I think.
Right.
And Dumoulin's a UFA at the end of the year. Like, when you look at that and you go, well, things are just like, players are just going to kind of disappear more and more. I mean, Tristan Jarry's a UFA at the end of the year. There's no guarantee that he re-signs in Pittsburgh. There's no guarantee they want to pay him what maybe he could get in the open market. And so in some respects, you look at this and you go, well, this might be the last year. At least next year might not look as good for the Penguins as this year could. So, do you go out and make a move and try and bring in a top six forward? And for my money, like, imagine bringing Bo Horvat into this team. He would not be a long-term solution. I don't think that they could sign him to a deal and keep him, at $9 million. But you consider a playoff run with Malkin, Crosby, and Horvat, and suddenly you're cooking with gas, and that'd be a formidable three-way line. And Horvat can play all over the place. He can play in the wing too, with either of those guys. But the Penguins, to me, they've, we know them as a team that can score a bunch of goals, and they're just not doing that. Out of all the playoff teams in the East, they have the least amount of goals scored, and there is only one team in the entire playoff picture right now that scored fewer goals, and that is the Minnesota Wild. So, not used to seeing it. The Penguins can't score goals.
Yeah, and I think the biggest issue, too, right now is Chris Letang being out. We know, recently, with the death of his father, he's been out. He's been taking some personal time. And then, so they've retroactively put him on IR today. So, they say he's day to day. So we don't know when he'll be back, but he's only played 29 games this year. And for me, when you look at the back end, to me, I've always preached that that's where offense starts, from the back end. And they don't really have guys, on defense between Pettersson, Dumoulin, P.O. Joseph and Jeff Petrie, who can really move the puck and dish it up like Letang. They don't have anybody even close to that caliber of offensive defenseman. So, without that, I think that's a big concern, because you can't really get the rush started. You can't get, guys on the breakaway, coming off the bench. You can't get any of those fancy plays going if you don't have guys that can really, tape the puck from the back end. And so, right. To me, I think that's where I'm looking more than a Bo Horvat. I would like to see them bring in a piece like that, because I think between Crosby, Malkin, and Carter, I think you've got enough strength down the middle. Now, maybe if you get a shot at Bo Horvat, yeah, absolutely, I'm taking it. I'm not going to say no to bringing in Horvat, but to me, I think assets will be better spent on the back end. But to your other point too, I think, with the way these guys are aging, Zucker's contract coming off the books after this year, and really, Jarry potentially not being back after this season either. I think, pretty much this year and every year for the next few years, they're going to go all in at every deadline, in my opinion, as long as they're still in the mix.
Yep. And, well, I guess you're saying that either Matt Dumba or John Klingberg are coming over to the Penguins.
I think either one of those guys. Well, I think Klingberg might better fit, because I like his offensive abilities a little bit better than Dumba's, but I think either one of those guys would work out pretty well.
Yeah, and Pittsburgh, other than Letang, and Letang's on a sweetheart deal too at $6.1 million. They really don't have that much money into their defense compared to a lot of teams. So they certainly should a little bit more towards that area of their team. Now, I guess the issue is deadline cap space, which is at $1.121 million. So that's where, again, I bring up Jason Zucker and I go, he seems like, he's got 28 points. It's not as if he's not doing anything. He's got 11 goals, on pace he'll score 20 goals again, and that's typically what he does. But at $5.5 million, that might be where the money needs to come from. And the fact that he's a UFA at the end of the year, you're going to lose him anyways. Unless of course he comes back and signs a lower deal, but it seems like that should be where that money's coming from. I guess the other side of that forward conversation is a deal that you made recently, and that's Rickard Rakell, who's still, he's putting up nice numbers, 15 goals here. He's on pace for 30 goals. It's odd that they're not getting the kind of offense from a team standpoint when you've got your players are producing it at clips higher than what their career generally would be at. So that's unusual as well.
Yeah, it really comes down to depth, right? And I think for a team like Pittsburgh, that's kind of where you've seen other teams succeed where they haven't. Your bottom six guys, right? Like Drew O'Connor, Kasperi Kapanen. I would love to see a little bit more out of him, and maybe he's a guy that might be a reclamation project for some team that says, we're willing to take on a 26-year-old with one more year after this season to see if we can't resurrect his career. And turn him into a good asset at the deadline next year. But I think ultimately this team just needs a little bit more depth up front. But again, I think, when we talk about the offense up front, it starts at the back end. So we'll see what they do. Clearly they need to move some money out, like you said. And so, that might be a Jason Zucker, or it could be, Kasperi Kapanen, who knows, but something's got to give.
Okay. Where are we going next? What do you do you have something that you want to chat about?
Boy, I one thing I did mention to you that I really was intrigued by was recent extension handed out to Matt Boldy from Minnesota. Yes. I look at this team and I'm surprised. I guess I just looking at the issues they had with the cap in this summer, and they had to let go of Kevin Fiala. And they lose basically a superstar forward, a guy who's putting up a point per game in LA and looks like just a total steal of a deal at $7 million. And then they turn around and hand, Boldy a big 7-year, 8x7 extension here. And don't get me wrong, I think he's a fantastic player. And, after a couple of years, this is going to look like a steal of a deal. But, was it maybe too early to hand out an extension right now, given that, he's a young guy and somebody that could have just qualified and worked out an extension over the summer with?
Well, I think what you're seeing is the Tage Thompson deal. It's very similar, right? Like about $7 million. Mm-hmm. And we all remember over the summer when the Sabres signed Tage Thompson to that deal, and we went, "Excuse me? You did what? He scored 8 goals last year." Like, what's wrong with you? And he's 25. So they had even more reason to not sign that deal with him, because he had already shown that he couldn't really score goals. And I guess 38. He had 38 last year. Sorry, but the year before that he had 8. So we were talking last year, like, is he going to ever be able to produce that way again, or was that just kind of a fluke? But they signed him to that deal, and now it looks like he should be making 11, 12. And suddenly that's maybe the best contract in the NHL. It's going to, like, Nathan McKinnon's deal is going to end, and Tage Thompson's deal is going to look like the best deal in the National Hockey League. $7.1 million. Maybe the only other guy I can think of that has a cheaper deal, but it's coming up, is David Pastrnak at 6.6.
Right. Yeah, and that makes you wonder too, if Boldy's getting 7, what do you think Pasta's going to get, right? What's the trickle down effect of that for an elite winger?
Well, David Pastrnak is one of the highest scoring players over the last since 16, 17. I think he's in the top 10 for goals, right? So, you're looking at a guy who's he's gonna get paid well into the 10s. Like, we're talking Johnny Gaudreau money.
Sure.
So I don't think you're really he's not looking at Matthew Boldy's contract, because he's a UFA. Boldy is 21 years old, and Boldy does not have the pedigree that Pastrnak has. So I mean, Boston's about to pay like crazy for Pastrnak. He's going to stay. But speaking of Boston, how about that Pavel Zacha deal? 4 times 4.75 for Pavel Zacha signing the extension. Something that New Jersey fans are like, are you freaking kidding me? Of course you leave and you play well.
Yeah, it's funny. He had never had higher than 36 points in his tenure in New Jersey, and it looks like he's going to eclipse that, assuming he stays healthy this year. So, I think Boston is just, and I think, don't get me wrong, I like Pavel Zacha, and he's one of those guys that kind of move up and down the lineup, and he can kind of fit in anywhere in your mix. He can play on the wing, he can play center. But I think this is a guy that basically they look at and they're trying to tell David Pastrnak, hey, we're not going anywhere. We're still signing guys. We're still going to keep talent here. And who knows, maybe they make a play for Bo Horvat as well and try to get him in on a long-term deal because they say, you know what, Patrice Bergeron or David Krejci are going to be gone. We're bringing in a guy who can center you for the next, 7-8 years and is going to do well. Just like, he's going to do what, I guess, Bergeron and Marchand did. They're going to be the next, pair for this team to carry the next chapter of the Boston Bruins.
Yeah, that would make sense from that standpoint, is that you're sort of replacing Bergeron in a Bergeron light kind of vibe.
Right.
Yeah. I'm looking across the league, and there's, the one team that maybe, I don't want to say they don't belong, but the one team that we definitely did not have in this spot is the Winnipeg Jets, leading the Central Division. They've won 3 in a row. They're now 8-2 in their last 10. They are an unbelievable 17-6 at home. They're not only are they scoring goals, they've been good at scoring goals. Man, they are, out of every playoff team in the West, the best defensive team. And the only team with fewer goals against than them is the Boston Bruins. If you had told me at the start of the year the Winnipeg Jets were going to pull a New York Islanders, I would not have believed you. But here we are. Remember, Barry Trotz took over the 31st worst defensive team in the league and turned them into the best defensive team in 1 year. And it looks like that has happened again. Not because of him, but
Rick Bowness.
Rick
My
Bowness,
goodness.
yes.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we talked about steals of contract. I mean, Nathan McKinnon's steal of a deal contract that he has. I look at Kyle Connor. He's a guy who's flown under the radar that nobody talks about. But he is pretty much.
We talk about him.
Well, yeah, we do. We absolutely do. So why aren't
he's
more
from
people...
Clinton Township, Michigan?
I mean, listen, you look at when he came into the league, I think he's top 6 in the league in terms of goals scored since he entered the NHL. The kid's been phenomenal, and he just goes about his business quietly each season, doesn't say a word. I mean, he's, since his rookie season, 20 games and 5 points. But after that, I mean, he's been 30-plus goals every single year outside the shortened season. And, in 2021, I mean, even last year, my gosh, 47 goals. It was phenomenal. And he's on pace to put up another 40-pointer, in goals. That's just going to be phenomenal. And
he is what everyone thought Patrick Laine would be.
Right.
That's what he has become. Everyone thought Laine would be this perennial 40, 50 goal scorer. And what it turned out, it was actually Kyle Connor.
Right. Yeah. And I'm interested because, Pierre-Luc Dubois has been having a phenomenal season, and he's pretty much been, centering Kyle Connor all year long. And so, who knows if that has kind of a little effect, but, Pierre-Luc Dubois is looking for a new deal, and I would like to see him get re-signed in Winnipeg. I think those two they look phenomenal together. I think Pierre-Luc Dubois has been great on both sides of the puck, playing great defensive hockey. He's a great face-off guy, and so I think if you can keep Scheifele and Dubois around for a while, man, this team's got a couple really, really good centers, especially with Cole Perfetti coming up, and you got some younger pieces in there. Not to mention on the back end, I mean, gosh, Josh Morrissey has been a revelation, and Neil Pionk, they've just looked fantastic back there. Not to mention all this, I continue to sing his praises every single day. Connor Hellebuck is just phenomenal. So, boy, he's got one more year before he gets an extension, and boy, he's looking like he's going to get a bit of a raise. So,
yeah, tough part about that deal for goaltenders is that, that deal ends and he's 31 years old. That's when it gets tough to make those calls for a goalie, because some goalies are great into their 30s and some become like Sergei Bobrovsky. and that's frankly, some become like Carey Price. Like Carey Price was never bad, but he just was hampered by injuries, and those injuries have made this deal. I know he took them to the Stanley Cup Finals one year in the weirdest year ever, right? Like that Canadian division and all that stuff. It was kind of I won't say a fluke, but that team definitely was playing above their pay grade. And that deal just has not worked out. I mean, they don't care. They've got lots of money to pay him for the next 4 years if he's on IR, if he never comes back. Who knows? Maybe he does come back. But those deals late in life for goaltenders, they just are, it's a tricky business. And it seems like it doesn't work out. It works out less than it actually happens, Sure. That Bobrovsky deal, I believe he signed that when he was 31. I guess he was 30 when he signed that deal, whereas Price was 31. So, and
I don't think that teams are gonna, even Winnipeg, for a guy like Hellebuyck, who's a top 3 goaltender, top 5 goaltender in this league. I don't think teams are going to even hand out that kind of money anymore to goaltenders. I think they'll play the term,
but I think you might see teams go, okay, I mean, we'll pay you $9 million for 3 years.
Yeah, but I think a majority of teams nowadays are going to rely, or at least try to go to a format where they can have like a 1A, 1B.
True.
And try to get those goaltenders to 50 games at the most. And
it makes you wonder how much cap space do you allot for your goaltenders, right? Like,
sure.
If we're saying, I mean, Montreal at one point had like $14.5 million or $15 million when they had Jake Allen and Price starting up there. So you wonder, like, what's the ideal cap space? Because, I mean, of course you can have the big cap number, and then you got like what Winnipeg has right now, your David Riddick for $900,000, or do you go the other route of having a couple guys that are both paid in the we'll say the $4 million range and can both steal games? I think of the Boston Bruins. Swayman, he's about to get paid. Where they had Tuukka Rask last year too. Like, they were willing to pay their goalies to have 2 good goalies. I wonder what the ideal allotment is for goalies.
Yeah, I mean, I can say this: no team wants to make their goaltender the highest paid player anymore.
No,
and
certainly not.
with the Jets, when his deal's up, the highest paid player on this team is going to be, Kyle Connor at 7.1. So. I have a hard time believing, depending if they can get, maybe, Pierre-Luc Dubois re-signed, but I have a hard time believing you're going to see, Hellebuyck anywhere far and above beyond that. He might be around that number, between $7 and $8 million bucks, maybe. I could see him re-signing for that on a short term.
And I guess it's more about the cap percentage, right? Like, maybe he might be at $8.5 million, but the cap.
And he's lucking out too, right? When the cap, in 2 years, the cap's going to skyrocket.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he might pick the right time to be a UFA.
To me, the deal at the ceiling is that like somewhere between 10 and 12% of your cap allotted to a goalie, right? Like, you look at Tampa Bay, they're at 12.6%, and that's like probably what should be on the high end. Then you look at the low end for teams that are good, at least. I mean, you can have a garbage team and not worry as much about it, but on the low end, you've got someone like the Pittsburgh Penguins, 6.4% to goalies, and that's probably low. That which you kind of, you're lucking out getting Jari at $3.5 million. But I guess maybe the New York Islanders are the best test case, because there you've got, that's 2 goalies, both signed $5 and $4 million, and there you're right at almost 11%. So somewhere in that 10 to 12% range for your goalies, I think, is appropriate if you have good goalies. But that's probably where you want to pay them. Somebody who's making 8% of the cap and somebody who's making 2 to 4, and then you're in a good position to win. Because we see it. You have to have 2 good goalies, or you are screwed. You're screwed. And there isn't a team like even Brian Elliott in Tampa Bay is winning games for the Lightning. You need to have somebody who's competent back there, because if you don't, you end up being the Vancouver Canucks. You end up being the St. Louis Blues, or even the Nashville Predators. Like there are some good teams that are getting skunked out by their backup goalie.
Yeah, I mean, could you imagine Seattle if they hadn't signed Philip Grubauer and they had a competent goaltender in there?
Oh my gosh,
right?
He's actually been playing better.
Yeah, better as of late. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, gosh, you wouldn't have to go out and try to score 8 goals every night.
Right.
But
imagine if Colorado had re-signed him.
Right?
Where would Darcy Kemper be?
I mean, Darcy Kemper would still be in Washington, but Gorgiev, he might have re-signed somewhere else, right? He might be in Seattle.
It's true. Well, any final thoughts as we ride this one off into the sunset there, Justin?
Boy, so let me just ask you, because I know you asked me this question to start the show, so I'll finish the show to ask you the same question.
Bookend this bitch.
Who is the first to go in Vancouver?
Okay, first to go in Vancouver.
If not Bo Horvat.
Yeah, I feel like the other answer is, of course, Brock Besser.
Okay.
But I'm going to go a different direction. I'm going to say that it's Tyler Myers.
Ooh, okay. I like that answer.
Tyler Myers will be the first piece to fall. He's making $6 million. He's got a 10-team no trade list. That's fine. Vancouver might be forced to hang on to a little bit of that deal, which I think you'd be okay with. He just isn't somebody that, in my mind, where Vancouver is at and where they're going, he's just not a necessary component to the rest of their team. He doesn't seem to fit very well. I think there are teams that he would fit, particularly teams that he doesn't have to play as high up in the lineup. He can kill penalties, which, I mean, he's a freaking gigantic person. So you put him in the right spot on a penalty kill and he can really succeed. I'm looking at, maybe even the Pittsburgh Penguins, who play a little bit of a, they're a little bit of a slower team. And, maybe you think, well, we don't want to add someone who's slow to a slow team. But at the same time, maybe do you add a player who plays more at your speed? Which it's really weird to talk about the Penguins being a little slower because they were so freaking fast when they won the Cup. But that was 5 years ago. Can you believe that? 5 years ago?
Wow.
No, that was 7 years ago when they won that Cup in 2016. That's unbelievable. Oh, I feel old. I think I was in my 20s.
We're not talking about it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so that's what I'm going Tyler Myers. And okay, final Vancouver question. Does a goaltender get moved? Does Thatcher Demko say bye-bye to the Vancouver Canucks?
Boy, well, I'm going to say no to the regular season. Off-season, that's another question now.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Thatcher Demko could obviously get a huge return. I think there will be a line of teams that would love to take him on and take a chance on him. Not that I think he's, having a terrible year, but I don't think it's been the right year for this team as a whole. So I'm not blaming him at all. But yeah, I don't think, Jim Rutherford said, he's not one of those untouchables.
Right. So
it could happen. Now, I don't think because of his injuries, goaltenders tend to not really, there's not too many goaltenders moving at the deadline. So yeah, I don't think he's going to go anywhere. But if they try to get younger, if they want to bring in some other young pieces, maybe, gosh, I can't even imagine. I can't think of a team maybe offhand that in the offseason might need a goaltender. But Yeah, who knows? Maybe the LA Kings come
Well,
calling.
the Carolina Hurricanes could always use a new goalie.
That's very true, right? They tend to go through them every couple of years, and they've got a couple UFAs, and then who knows? Maybe he makes a
Chekhov,
a good partner for Kochetkov there, and that works out pretty well for them. But
all right, yep, or Seattle. Seattle, could you just jump right across the pond there over to Seattle, and they can just send him Grubauer. Easy switch. All right, well, that's our show. You can find us on Twitter at OT Hockey Talk. Justin, have a great rest of your day. To our listeners, enjoy whatever time of day it is that you're listening to this. We hope that this isn't the best part of your day, but also we're glad it wasn't the worst. We'll talk to you later.